Hello everyone, this is Rod from the Alchemist Den, the Hermetic and Esoteric Study Society. Today we will be talking about a tarot deck, one of the most famous or oldest tarot deck in history, and I'm talking about the Sola-Busca. I think most of you may be familiar with the very daunting and dark, although beautiful artwork of the Sola-Busca. Is definitely one of the most difficult tarot to understand as well. And well, one of the very interesting thing about this tarot deck is that this deck is one of the few tarot deck that is fully pagan oriented, while the other decks, especially the more recent one, has some kind of Christian flavor to them. The Sola-Busca maintain a very strict pagan-oriented iconography and history behind the cards. It's one of the first tarot deck that came with the structure as we know it today, so with 78 cards, with 22 major arcana, 22 trumps, and 56 small cards divided in the classic four suits of sword, cups, wand, and coin or pentacle. And well, the iconography, especially the major arcana, I'm sure if somebody's familiar with this card, I believe it's been very challenging to try to match the images of the major arcana with the more traditional, the more known traditional arcana, for example, of the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot. The images are very particular. They're very, as I mentioned before, it's definitely transmit this kind of dark feel to, there is a very strong dark feel to this deck. What we still don't know, as of today, we still don't know what was the purpose of this deck. For sure was not most likely for playing cards, because what we have today, the cards are beautifully preserved, so that means that they were hardly used for actually playing. We know that during the 1500s, 1600, during the Renaissance time, was common for people to gift, to use this artwork as a gift for wedding presents or to impress a family or this kind of like presents. Or it could also be something a little bit more darker than that, and it could be an initiatory cult ritual that is actually pictured. Like a picture grimoire, if we want to call it that way. So back to the few information about the deck before we move forward and we see the cards a little bit more in details. This deck was produced in Ferrara in Italy during the actually between the 1470 and the 1500. We don't know exactly the date where this deck was finished, was produced, but is definitely between the 1470 and the 1500. During the time, Ferrara was under the Este family, is the Renaissance, so we have these powerful families running cities and city-states. So in Ferrara there were the Este, as well as in the Medici were in Firenze, the Sforza in Milan, and then we had the powerful Republic of Venice, La Serenissima in Venice. So actually this deck was produced under the Este court, and it was addressed to a patrician for a Venetian family. And another thing that we actually still don't know as of today, is the name of the artist. But we may have some clue about the commissioner of these cards. Lastly, just for information, these cards are available today. You can see it if you happen to be in Milan. They are exposed at the Pinacoteca of Brera, exactly in Milan. And they are there since the 2009, when the Ministry of Cultural Heritage of Italy bought this deck from the last owners, the Marquise Busca and the Count Sola. That's why actually we don't know the real name of this deck, but the name Sola-Busca is taken by the name of the last owners until the Ministry of Cultural Heritage bought it in 2009. The cards were also exposed in 1907 at the British Museum, and then where was the time then Pamela Coleman Smith had the chance to visit and to see the exposition, to see this card at the British Museum, and that's where she got inspired. In fact, some imagery of the Sola-Busca is reported by Coleman Smith in the Wade Smith Tarot deck, with the most famous Rider Smith deck. We can see some cards that are pretty much the same. Some other are clearly inspired to that, although then Pamela Coleman Smith has a much more theatrical and Shakespearean related feel to the general tarot deck that she depicted. But going back to our Sola-Busca deck, I think whoever tried to open this deck and tried to have a look at the card got a little bit confused by all the names that are attributed to these cards. So we don't have the usual Temperance, Justice, Hermit, but we have these names. And names that are mostly coming from Plutarch, from the opera of Plutarch called Parallel Lives. Many names also repeated in Dante's Comedy. And there are similar, there are interesting observations between the Sola-Busca iconography and the work of Dante in the Commedia, but we will talk about the esoteric part of the Commedia of Dante and relation with these names in another video. So there are mainly three themes running in this deck. The first theme that we have is related to Roman military figures. And these Roman military figures are mostly taken from the time of Rome when it was a republic. This was the time where Roman was fighting the Punic Wars against Carthage, which was this colony, Phoenician colony in North Africa. So within the major arcana, we have like the number 3, Mario. This was referred to Gaius Marius, who was a Roman general and a statesman. We have, for example, the 13, Catone, referred to Marcus Porcius Cato, also known as Cato the Younger, that was a conservative Roman senator. And this Cato is also the doorkeeper of the purgatory in Dante's Comedy. So there are a few things, but again, as I mentioned, we will talk about this in another video. Then we have the number 14 is Bocchus, the king of Mauritania, that originally was fighting against Rome, but then he decided to give up and gave his city to the Roman Republic. We have number 2, Postumio, which is Lucius Postum Albinus, that was actually a general, was killed in a battle against the Celts. And the Celts, there is a story that the Celts actually decapitated him and used his skull to make a cup for libation to the gods. And this is why in the card we may have the skull depicted in the iconography of this card. And then we have one of the most daunting, one of the darkest card of the deck, which is the number 13, the number 8, Nerone, of course referred to Nero, the Roman emperor. Anyway, so we have this first theme that runs around these Roman generals, run around the time of the Punic Wars, and run around the Republic time of Rome. Now, one particular about this time of Rome is also when the Roman defeated Carthage, defeated and finally won the Punic Wars. And it was a kind of a tradition in Rome that whenever they conquer a new place, they would somehow assimilate the gods of that civilization, of that population. And this could be the period where in Rome got the cult of, or the god Saturn. Saturn was originally called Baal Hamon among the, it was actually a Phoenician Canite and Phoenician god known Baal, became Baal Hamon, became Cronus for the Greeks, and finally became Saturn for the Roman. The second theme that we find in the deck is related to Babylonian history. So we find two very important Babylonian kings, starting with Nembroto, the number 20, which is referred to Nimrod, the biblical figure described as the one that initiated the construction of the Tower of Babel, and also known to be a very rebellious kind of king. And at the 21st trump card, we find Nabucodonosor, which is referred to Nebuchadnezzar. Again, another king of Babylon that reigned between the 1121 to the 1100 BC. The third, and most likely the most relevant theme that we find in the deck, is related to the story of Alexander the Great. Besides finding Alexander himself depicted in the card of the King of Swords, we find some other very important figures related to his origin and to the story, where Alexander the Great is supposed to be, he claimed to be the son of the god Zeus Ammon, a syncretic god between the Greek Zeus and the Egyptian Ammon. Of course, historically speaking, Alexander the Great was the son of Philip II and Olympia as the mother. But the claim came as, well, one of the story is that beside Aristotle tutoring the young Alexander, there was also an Egyptian pharaoh named Nectanebo at the court of King Philip II that was also tutoring Alexander. The pharaoh was exiled in Macedonia while Egypt was under the control of the Persian. So story has it that most likely this Nectanebo, this Egyptian pharaoh, may have actually slept with Olympia, the mother of Alexander, and having, so basically fathered Alexander with Olympia. Another more romantic story that was going around in the Middle Age is actually that Zeus Ammon himself, the god himself, impregnated Olympia. And as we can see also, there is this very interesting image depicting the Macedonian queen Olympias. She's actually in bed with the Egyptian sorcerer, so Nectanebo, and he's disguised as a dragon. That is disguised as a dragon because it's representing Zeus Ammon. And we can see also from the window King Philip peeking inside the room, and the dragon is actually looking back at Philip, and Philip is I don't know, just looking but unable to do anything. So this is the story about the divine origin of Alexander the Great, and a reference to his paternity by the divinity Ammon. So the other figures that we find related to Alexander's story, we find Ammone in the King of Knight of Swords, which is referred actually to the god Ammon. We find Olympia as the Queen of Swords. Olympia is the mother of Alexander. And Natanabo, King of Cups, is actually referred to the exiled Egyptian pharaoh Nectanebo. Well, in the deck also we find a very strong alchemical reference. There's many cards that are explicit, an explicit iconography related to alchemical processes. We find, for instance, alchemical procedures and compared or depicted like an agricultural work. And this comparison between alchemy and agricultural work was actually introduced by a famous text, a Middle Age text called the Testamentum. And we find this association mainly in the suit of wands. And if we even look at the Six of Wands, for instance, this is a clear depiction that we will see also later in the Atalanta Fugens of Michael Mayer, representing the impersonification of alchemy itself. So what did we get so far in our description? So far we have some reference to the Carthage god Baal Hammon, the one that later became Kronos, known by Kronos by the Greek, and Saturn in Rome. We have a clear reference depicted to this in the history of Alexander, as well as the presence of the god Hammon, and him claiming to be the son of the god Hammon. We have a very strong pagan orientation of the deck, almost as a ritual, almost like in a ritualistic form. We have this strong reference to alchemy that we see it over and over in many cards, and fire. Basically, most of fire that is recurring through the cards. Most of the figures are holding torches, and is holding the torches up, holding the torches down. So fire is a recurring theme, as well as in the daunting, one of the most daunting card of the deck, which is Nero, the Nero Emperor, that is actually in the position of sacrificing or burning a child over flames. So this could be, of course, a reference to, again, going back to Baal Hammon, that was a god known to require child sacrifices, or it could also be a reference to the hymn to, if you recall, the hymn to Demeter of Homer, where Demeter herself, disguised as Doso, when she was working, she was nursing Demophon, the son of the king of Eleusis, Seleucus. So Demeter was actually exposing Demophon at night over some kind of sacred fire in order to make Demophon into a god. So all this reference to fire, yes, could be actually the alchemical fire, and as well as the sacred fire of transformation. So paganism, alchemy, cosmology, reference to the Chaldean oracles, and we are in the middle of the 1500s, where actually the church has a very strong grip, especially in Italy. So where all this information comes from? Well, definitely there was a very important event that happened in the 1438 and 1439, which was the Great Council, and it happened in between Ferrara and Firenze. The Great Council was organized by the Church of the East and the Church of the West. So we had a Byzantine church, and Byzantine scholars coming over to Italy to discuss how to try to reunite the two churches. One, of course, in the East, with a very strong Platonic underground and very strong Platonic teaching, and the one in the West with a very strong Aristotelian teaching. Aristotle was still considered one of the cornerstone of the Christian philosophy. While again in the East they were a little bit more, the pagan influence were much stronger than the West. So anyway, there was this great council happening, and during this great council, a very important figure came to Italy. His name was Georgius Gemistos Platon. He was a Greek scholar and one of the most renowned Byzantine philosophers. Platon arrived in Ferrara in 1438. And it seems he had connection and he had teaching and he had a chance to explain his philosophy through writings. Unfortunately, most of them got burned, but he had the chance to explain his theories, and his philosophy was very much based on Plato's teaching that were still unknown in Europe during that time. We know that the earliest impact of Plato, we have it after Ficino's translation, so after the Medici order Ficino, the translation. We also find Plato himself depicted in the card in the Ten of Cups, and we assume that is Plato. Of course, the Ten of Cup, given the number 10 and given the resemblance, could also be Pythagoras himself, but there is much more credibility in the intention of actually depicting the image of Giorgio Gemistos' Plato. So, and finally, we can come to the commissioner of this deck. As I mentioned at the beginning, we don't know the artist, but most likely we know the commissioner. And this could point to an Italian poet, philosopher, an Hermeticist, a very famous Hermeticist and a magician of the early Renaissance. His name was Ludovico Lazzarelli. He lived between the 1447 and the 1500. Lazzarelli, besides being one of the most famous Hermeticists during his period, he was also one that helped Ficino translating the Corpus Hermeticum. In fact, Ficino translated 15 treatises, and Lazzarelli translated 3 or 4 parts. Now I don't remember exactly, but Lazzarelli was the one that actually completed the translation of the Corpus Hermeticum together with Ficino. And the interesting part about this too is that while Ficino, after the translation, was not so impressed by the Hermetic philosophy, and he actually moved more toward the Platonic teaching. He was much more impressed by the translation of Plato than the Corpus Hermeticum. For Lazzarelli, it was exactly the opposite. Lazzarelli was pretty much, he took a very strong Hermetic position, a very strong Hermetic, he was teaching actually Hermetic philosophy. So Lazzarelli could be very well, in terms of knowledge and in terms of what this deck could present, could be very well the commissioner of this work. So through his clear Neoplatonic, Hermetic, planetary magic, for sure there is also the influence of the Picatrix, the manuscript of Picatrix studied by Lazzarelli. He was actually teaching the influences of the stars and the planets in our lives. So the connection with all the aspect of universal life, as well as the causes, as well as going to inquire and go beyond the causes of reality. And the purpose ultimately is to be able to change the destiny, or to have a person get free from what the Greek would call the ananke, the necessity, which is the necessity of the cycle life and death, and reincarnation, taking another life, the soul actually having to reincarnate. Reincarnation, metempsychosis, basically. But one of the teaching of Lazzarelli was also to go beyond this cycle, so actually getting rid of ananke, of the necessity, and being able, so therefore, to change not only the destiny during our present lives, but most likely also to be able to change our faith, our destiny for the next life. So this deck could also have been a deck addressed to a group of initiate, to a certain cult, for a certain ritual. And we could have the hint of being a deck for initiates in the image of the Three of Wands. We find this image of with this mouth shut, and the mouth shut is a typical representation of the mystery cult, the word mystery itself coming from the Greek mysterion, from mustes, meaning the initiated one. From the root word is moi, shut, so actually having a mouth shut is a typical iconography for the mystery cults. So if this is the possible reading that we have about this deck, it's possible that ritual was rooted in these cards, a ritual that come from Platon's theurgical and magical system into a visual form, taking from the Chaldean oracles, to taking from the Orphic hymns, taking from the Picatrix. And these were actually information coded, a visual information coded for working with the, as we mentioned before, the necessity of fates and trying to manipulate current life and future lives. Now, to close, I would like to close with the words of Peter Mark Adams, taken from his beautiful work and research that he did in his book called The Game of Saturn. And Adams says, if this hypothesis is correct, we would expect the deck to contain encoded references to malefic stars, constellations, and planets that would provide the raw power required for magic rituals. If such malefic references are found, then we will be forced to conclude that this deck itself is a grimoire of dark sorcerer's practices. So the Sola-Busca deck is still very much an open research, still very much a lot of information that we can actually investigate and look further. For sure remains one of the most fascinating deck of tarot in history. So before leaving, I would like to recommend, and I couldn't recommend it enough, The Game of Saturn, the book by Peter Mark Adams, where he did this big research, is an enormous research about this deck. I definitely recommend this book also because not only as an academic, a very deep academic research to it, but also the narration style is really nice, and I think is a kind of book that once you pick it up, is actually hard to put it down. To know also more about the deck, I also recommend, if you can read Italian, it's called Tarocchi Sola-Busca, Storia, Misteri, Alchimia by Cristina Dorsini and Morena Poltronieri. Another one, unfortunately, again, is in Italian, Il segreto dei segreti, I Tarocchi Sola-Busca e la cultura ermetico-alchemica tra Marche e Veneto alla fine del 400, and is by Gnaccolini. And if you want to buy actually a deck, I would recommend definitely the Meneghello edition that actually comes with numbered copies. So this is it about the Sola-Busca. As I mentioned, many references will be also found in esoteric reading of Dante Alighieri. We will do another video about the Divina Commedia, and for today this is it. So thanks again for staying with me today, and have a nice day. Thank you. Bye bye.